All right. Welcome everyone. I know we have folks joining in, a slow trickle. Welcome to tonight's last event of March, National Nutrition Month. We are so excited to be with our entire dietitian team, as always, whenever we have everybody together for our Cooking Methods 101 virtual hangout, Discover the Power of Nutrition. Now, I did not come up with that title on my own. That is the theme of National Nutrition Month this year. There is a theme every year, but today we are going to discover the power of nutrition via a few different cooking methods. So you will see sauteing, steaming, simmering, and roasting in our kitchens today. But before we even get started, I of course want to make mention to our very wonderful sponsors because our digital education would not be possible without them. So, our virtual education events are presented through UFH Connect by West, Merck, Novartis, and Gilead Sciences with support from gold sponsors Pfizer, GSK, and Daiichi Sankyo, and our supporting sponsors TerraSera Therapeutics and Veristem Oncology. And our culinary nutrition content is sponsored by Merck. So, we have so much goodness in store always from our UFH Connect. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up in April that I'll talk about in a second. But just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Like I said, this is our March virtual hangout and the last event of National Nutrition Month. If you can, just keep yourself muted throughout the duration of today's presentation, and that's just helpful for all of us with our earbuds in so that there's no background noise. You can, of course, raise your hand or unmute if you have a question. If you want to put it in the chat, I will be sure to ask the dietitian who is currently presenting whatever questions you do have, and we'll be recording the presentation, which can be viewed afterwards in our video library. So like I said, since it is the end of March, we are thinking of moving towards April here. And so we have a lot of wonderful events coming up in April. On April 16th at 6 p.m., we have our HER Speaker Series, Financial Resources with Triage Cancer and Family Reach. On April 22nd at 5 p.m., we have our virtual hangout, When Everything Changes Between Us, How Cancer Reshapes Our Closest Relationships with Celeste Rivera of NIBRA. And then on April 23rd at 1 p.m., we have our Ask the Experts with Cleaning House with Lindsay Dahl and Jolene Hart. And all of these events that I mentioned the times of are in Eastern Time. And so you can always register for all of our events on our website, uniteforher.org/UFH Connect. And I will put that into the chat shortly for everybody. But without further ado, I know we have a lot of cooking to get to, and we all are, I think, using the oven or heat in some way, so I want to make sure that we get off without a hitch. So I am going to bring my wonderful colleague up here, Erin Pellegrin, and she is going to start us out with sautéing.
Thank you. I am so excited. I love National Nutrition Month, and I love this opportunity because I feel like we're bringing our Back to Basics video library to live, our Unite for Her community. So this is always really fun. And I think sometimes we take for granted knowing different cooking techniques if it's something that we watched our family do or if we just kind of experimented on our own. So I love that we're sort of highlighting different methods, and I will be talking about sauteing this evening. So the recipe that I'm making, you'll find all of our recipes on the blog, are spiced lentil cakes topped with some sauteed spinach. So to share a little bit about the cooking method of sauteing. So the word saute comes from the French word sauter, which means to jump, which is an adjective that is meant to describe how the food moves in the pan. So essentially, it's a dry heat method of cooking, although we're using a little bit of fat in this. And for this, I'll be using olive oil, but it is a dry heat method of cooking. So when we think about Anything that we're using that we want to saute, we want to think that water or moisture is our enemy. We want a browning to take effect. And this browning in food is called the Maillard reaction. So it is essentially when you have carbohydrates that are exposed to heat and they create a browning. So a common example that dietitians that we often hear from chemistry or in food science is thinking of toast, right? So when we are making toast, we're taking bread, we're exposing it to heat, and it has that brown toasty color, and that is the Maillard reaction. So that is what we will be doing, although we're not going to be browning our spinach per se, but we're going to have it wilt, and we'll be using that heat to create a little bit of wilting. So to do sauteing, the pan you want to use is either a fry pan, a saute pan. The biggest thing you want to think about is using a pan that is wide and that is shallow. And wide so that we have a big surface area. Like I said, we'll be using a little bit of fat, but there's not going to be any other liquid in this, and that will help to create some browning. So let's get started. The first thing you want to think about when you are sauteing is heating your pan. So spinach is a delicate leaf. So I'm going to be sauteing on medium heat. So we want our pan to warm up a little bit before we're adding our fat. It could be butter, it could be olive oil, it could be a high heat oil, it could be ghee, whatever you're using could be an appropriate um, frying, fat, cooking fat is what I mean to say. The biggest point, whatever you're using, you want to use enough that it covers the bottom of the pan, but you don't want it to create a lot of liquid, right? So we want to be really conservative where how much we're using. So as our pan gets warm, let's add a little bit of olive oil to this. So a little goes a long way. We'll just let this get warm. And so, like I said, I will be sauteing spinach, but before we add that to the pan, let's start by prepping our ingredients. So if you are ever looking for a delicious way to make spinach, this is the easiest and the tastiest version to make it. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is adding some thinly sliced garlic cloves to our oil. Now, it's really important, especially with garlic, that if we are starting off a recipe with some sliced garlic, the pan is not too hot because we don't want to brown or burn our garlic. And so starting off in medium is really important. So we're going to thinly slice our garlic. You can see our pan is nice and warm. The olive oil has loosened a little bit. So the first thing that we'll do is add our garlic to the pan. And so we'll just start to notice as this warms a little bit of sizzle. So if your pan is too hot and you're starting to notice some browning, you want to turn that heat down. Sometimes I even remove the pan from the top of the stovetop if I feel like it's burning. So you'll start to notice here, this is exactly what we want, some bubbles that are starting to form around the outside of the garlic. That's exactly what you want to see. So we'll let this start to take up some flavor and brown a little bit. You'll hear a little bit of a sizzle. That's fine. We're not browning, we're not burning. Next, we're going to zest a lemon. So lemon with spinach and garlic really adds a brightness to this dish. So to our garlic, we're going to add the zest of one lemon. And again, we don't want our heat to be too hot because these are more delicate ingredients. So although sauteing uses a higher heat most of the time, we're going to be a little bit conservative with it. So I'm going to zest the whole lemon. And we'll add this to our garlic. And you can use, I'm going to be using tongs because once we add our spinach, we're going to be flipping a little bit. So we're just going to get this and start to infuse that oil. So we're hearing a sizzle, we're seeing a sizzle, we're not browning, we're not burning. This is great. So you see these bubbles, this is the perfect temperature that we want. That's a perfect start to the saute. So here's that. Remember I said to jump, we're sauteing, we're seeing that garlic clove here jump. So this is exactly what we want to reach for. Now, one of the big mistakes when we think about sauteing, remember I said it's a dry heat cooking oil, or a dry heat cooking method, I should say. So you want your ingredients to be dry, whether it's a vegetable, whether it's some chicken. You want to make sure that it's dry. So, especially for our greens, I've washed and I've dried my spinach. Ideally, we're not going to crowd the pan too much, although spinach cooks down so much that I'm going to go ahead and crowd this a little bit. So, to our pan, now we're going to add our greens. We'll add a little bit of kale and just a tad bit of salt. Now, when we're using salt in a recipe, one of the things we know is salt draws water out. So not adding that much because I remember water, moisture is our enemy when we're thinking of sauteing. So just a little bit. And what you want to do when you're sauteing is we're going to let this sit for about 30 seconds. And using tongs, we're going to start to rotate the spinach in the pan. And the goal is all of our greens, we want it to touch the bottom of the pan so that it starts to wilt. As it's wilting, it's also going to get brighter. So what we're going to see is our spinach is going to start to get bright, bright green. Making sauteed spinach is one of the quickest ways that you can cook it. So this recipe takes like next to no time. So it's a really easy dish that you can throw together. I'm going to use it as a topper to my spiced lentil cakes. So this will be a little bit of a garnish. So once we kind of use our tongs and rotate this around, we'll let this sit, and we're already seeing some of our spinach is turning dark green and it's starting to wilt. It happens very, very quickly. So as it cooks, you can add some more spinach. We'll just be playing with what you're seeing here before we dress our dish. Now, a couple things to think about again while you're sauteing, some rules. So again, making sure you're preheating your pan, making sure your ingredients are dry, not overcrowding the pan. Although with greens, we can get away with it a little bit. But if you're sauteing other kind of vegetables or chicken or fish, you want to make sure you give it ample room to cook. You want to make sure that if you're cutting up your ingredients, they're generally the same size. This is coming together quickly. This looks great. So even size pieces means even cooking. We're going to let this go for probably another 30 seconds before we're just about done, and we're going to plate our dish. And then you want to season it at the end. So once we take this off from heat, which I'll do in probably about 10 seconds, I'll finish it with a little bit more salt and then some red pepper flakes, and then we're ready for serving. So this looks great. This cooked down. It's still bright green. There is still a little bit of texture, but we've sauteed nicely. So now I'm going to turn this off from heat and let's plate up. So like I said, I am using this as a topper to some really delicious spiced lentil cakes. And this is how I like to serve my lentil cake. Let me actually finish my last little bit of salt and some red pepper flakes just for a little bit of heat. If you are sensitive to heat, of course, you can leave out that last step, but this really just comes together nicely. Perfect. Beautiful sauteed spinach. Okay. So we've got our spiced lentil cakes, really delicious recipe, great for meal prep. They freeze beautifully as well. So what we have here, and I have been enjoying making them in a silicone muffin pan, which is why you see they're shaped like a muffin. But how I have been enjoying this is first on our serving plate, we're going to add a little bit of a tomato chutney. So this is a garlic tomato chutney we're going to use as a bottom layer. Also has some garlic and some really beautiful flavors. We'll add a couple warm spice cakes. And then we'll top it with our beautiful sauteed spinach right on top. And so you get this really lovely crunch and texture from the lentil cake. You get bright acidity from the tomato chutney, as well as the brightness of the lemon. And then you get this earthiness with a little bit of heat from our sauteed spinach. So like I said, that literally came together in no time at all. This is a beautiful ensemble of flavors. Again, sauteing is a great method of cooking for so many different foods. Proteins, vegetables, of course, our leafy greens. So following those first few steps is really key so that you have success anytime you plan to saute as part of a recipe. So With that, any questions before about sauteing or cooking before we move on to our next cooking method? I don't
Yes,
see anything
one
that's come through. Oh,
question that
good.
I had is
Yeah.
do you have a favorite tomato chutney recipe or do you get it from someplace local?
I mean, there's lots of good recipes out there. There is a local, so here in the Philadelphia area, there is a local brand that I've seen at farmers markets. I'll grab it out of my refrigerator. This is a family meaning us, a family favorite brand. So if you see this, like there's some farmers markets in the city, they sell it at DeBruno Brothers. They have lots of different kinds. This is a spicy garlic. They have a plain one. But I would put this on like a brick and I would eat it. This stuff is so delicious. So the spiced lentil cakes, the flavorings that go into it. So there's turmeric, there's coriander, there's cumin. You get a little bit of heat with chili powder, which of course you could leave out. There's some garam masala. So that flavor profile really plays to the tomato chutney because you're also not only just a little bit of garlicky, but you'll get a little sweet from it. So the flavors play really nicely. So that's what I tend to use.
Love
But
it.
you can of course make that on your own and even try making it. I know we're getting our gardens ready for perhaps some summer tomatoes. So if you have an overabundance later this summer, making your own tomato chutney is a great way to use them.
Love it. Amazing idea. And only other question was somebody was asking about the recipes in the chat, and those are in the chat. They are linked and they are also on our Unite for Her recipe blog. So make sure you check that out for all of our recipes.
Amazing. And I will say, although I have been making my baked lentil cakes in a muffin pan that I'm using, you certainly don't have to do it. You can make it on a baking sheet. They bake up beautifully. And yes, good for meal prep. They freeze great, good for leftovers and reheating throughout the week. So really delicious and easy, quick to come together recipe.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin.
Wonderful. Thank you. So now I think we're going to move on to our next cooking method. And I know we don't do it without tossing our spatula over. So I'm going to toss it over to Catherine so that she can jump in. Let me know when you grabbed it.
A little bit more, a little bit more. It's
Oh, go ahead.
okay. Okay,
I
got
know
it.
I'm reaching far to Texas. You got it? Excellent.
All right, I
All
got it.
right,
Thank you so
Catherine,
much,
take it
Erin.
away. Yeah.
Thank you. So today I will be steaming, and I'll be steaming nothing more than edamame, which is a snack favorite. If you have any questions on soy, I'm pretty sure it's gonna come up. But just so you guys know, soy is definitely safe for any type of hormonal cancer, specifically breast cancer. It has to come from a food source, so not really from supplements. It's actually been heavily researched that it can actually provide even some protective health benefits for breast cancer. So just to get out of the way, and not only that, but they're super nutritious, they're super healthy, and so easy to make. So I'll be steaming them, and steaming is such an easy cooking method that I will be taking more time into everything else but steaming. So for steaming, it's essentially just vapor, water vapor that's cooking your food. So we're gonna have it over water, but not covering. So you can get one of those steaming baskets, or if you don't have one, you can simply just get a sifter and then over a boiling pot of water, which I have over here, there's just water boiling here. I'm pretty much just gonna open the lid. We are going to be needing it to have a lid. And I'm going to put in my sifter on top of it, making sure that it does not touch the water. So that way we make sure that it's just the vapor that is cooking the actual vegetable. So I'm just going to toss a couple of edamame in here. It takes about 5 minutes to cook these. So I'll just put them in here. I'm going to make sure it's still boiling. And then I'm just gonna cover it to make sure that everything gets all of that air, all of that vapor gets to moisten all of the food and then cook it. Now, the nice thing about steaming is that number one, it's super easy. So even if you don't have the steaming basket, you can come up with a method of your own. It doesn't even have to be a sifter. As long as you're pretty much covering over the water and it's not touching the water and it's just the vapor that is cooking the food. There you go. There you're steaming something. Now, the benefits of it is that, first of all, if it's a vegetable, which is typically what we would steam, so it'd be things like edamame, it could be broccoli, it could be carrots. The nice thing is that some of the nutrients, so essentially the water soluble vitamins B and C, which tend to lose some of them during the cookie, whenever we're exposing them to water, with the vapor, it's not necessarily going to happen as much. So we are retaining some of those nutrients. Second of all, we're not using oil. So if you're trying to stay away from the oils, avoid those added fats, then it's another cooking method that you. And thirdly, if you're having stomach issues and sometimes if you have to like really, really, really cook everything well so that it breaks down all those fibers and it's easier to digest, food can turn out pretty mushy, right? If you're boiling it, if you're having to like double and triple cook it, versus if you're steaming it, it's gonna retain some of that texture. So it's not going to turn out mushy. Be quite the opposite. It's going to be brighter in color because it's not all of those vitamins and all those colors are not going to be staying in the water. It's just going to be staying there, being bright, retaining some of that moisture, some of those vitamins, and it's going to be a little bit easier to digest because it's going to be very well cooked. So that's going to be sitting there for the next 5 minutes. And make sure that it's all covered. That's what we want, though. We don't want that is the benefit of why they made the steaming basket because it is going to be on the lower end of the pot with minimal water, but all of the vapor is going to have more space to run through, so it cooks a little bit faster. But with this, as long as you have it covered, it's boiling and not touching the water, we're good to go. Now we have the edamame, and then now I just want to add a little bit more flavor. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of seasoning with the sesame oil, rice vinegar, and I'm also going to be using tamari. So we're going to make a little bit of a ginger sesame dressing for this and make it a little bit spicy. So I'm just going to dump everything in here. There's no particular order. We're just going to create a little dressing and then put it on top. So I'm going to be using sesame oil. I'll be using, oh, this is close. Give me 1 second. All right, so I'm going to be using for this 1 tablespoon of sesame oil, and then sesame oil. I don't want to miss this. I am wearing white, and I know this can get messy. So 1 tablespoon of sesame oil is going to have it's going to be a lot of good flavor. It's oil. It's healthy fats, so it does provide a good amount of anti-inflammatory properties. It is still oil, so we want to be mindful in keeping it to a minimal. There's also some nice antioxidants in sesame oil, so we want to make sure we're adding those. And not only that, but it's a lot of flavor. So that on one hand, I'm also using tamari sauce, which is pretty much soy sauce. The only difference is that it does not have gluten and is a little bit more smooth, but it is still soy sauce and it's pretty high in sodium. So again, we want to be mindful if you are really trying to stay away from sodium from salt, then you can use the low sodium one, or you can just cut the serving in half. This is going to be half a tablespoon. There we go. And then I'm going to be using some rice vinegar. This is pretty much just to brighten the vegetables. There are not that many benefits from this, but it does help us to create a little bit more volume. There's plenty of flavor in here. So it's pretty much to maximize this and prevent any of those added calories or maybe too much boils. We still want to be mindful of the flavoring and making sure that it has all that brightness. So here's my dressing. I also have half a tablespoon of garlic, fresh garlic. And to even spice it up a little bit more, I'm going to be grating a little bit of ginger. Ginger is awesome. Ginger is just one of those things that come in handy for everything, whether it's using as a flavoring or whether it's just one little a tea, something that kicks in. So I'm gonna take a little bit off with a tablespoon. I'm gonna take some of the skin off, just pretty much pressing against it so that I can peel it without it getting too messy. And then I'm just gonna grate a little bit because a little bit goes a long way. So just gonna peel some, and then I have my super guitar grater that I've been meaning to use. This is a perfect time. I'm just gonna grate just a little bit. Not even full in there, and I can already smell it. Let's do this. So fresh. If you don't have fresh ginger, you can always do the dried one. Still pretty strong. There's also those little ones that come in cubes and they are frozen if you don't typically use it, but it's good to have on hand. Okay, there we go. Just a little bit. And that's pretty much it. This is going to be just a little bit to give even more flavor to the edamame. And then just for that, I just chop up a little bit of green onions, and then even for more flavor, I'm going to be adding some sesame seeds. I decided to use the Everything But Bagel, which has the black sesame seeds, the white ones, and even a little bit more flavor. So I'm going to check in to see how this is. Okay, this is ready. See, steaming is just so easy, and you can steam pretty much any vegetable. You can even steam fish if you're trying to change up the way that you're making it. Very, very simple. Okay, so I'm just going to toss everything here. The nice thing is that I don't even have to use anything to take it out. As long as I'm using my sifter, it's already, I just dump it in here. Okay. And then I'm just going to add in my dressing. And I'm going to mix it in some so that we can serve it. And I can just show you guys can just see the warm coming out, but it just smells delicious. Okay. So there'll be a little bowl here. It's gonna be my before dinner snack. It's like a nice snack for watching TV, or if you have friends coming over and you don't really want to cook anything too extensive, but it's still nice, flavorful, nutritious. There's so many nutrients in edamame. So it'll have they're a really good source of protein, of fiber, magnesium, iron. And there you go. I took out my chopstick. There you go. This is your brightening sesame edamames.
That
Do
looks
I
so
have any
good,
questions?
Catherine.
Do I have any
Um,
questions before I hand it over to Michelle?
I don't see any questions, but I love the dressing that you put with it. I think sometimes when we think of steamed edamame, we're just finishing it with a little bit of salt, but your flavor combination, the texture with the dried seasoning that you add to it, it's really a fun way to like spice it up a little bit. I love that.
Yeah. See, sometimes I feel like whenever we hear steaming, it sounds boring, but the cool thing just happens afterwards. We just have to season it.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, before you pass the spatula, one question that I did have, can you remind us again, how much water did you put in the bottom of your pan? Was it a lot or a little? How much did you steam with?
I did just a little. So it doesn't matter how much water it is because I mean, there has to be some water because the point of steaming is the vapor that comes from it. So as long as it's sitting right below it, and if you do the test, you put it over it, and as long as it's not touching the sifter or it's not touching the food, whatever you're using as a holder or the basket, then it's fine.
Great. Thank you. And we did have one question just about eating edamame. You don't eat the skin, right? You just pull the beans out.
You don't eat the skin. That is a
Yeah,
good
great.
question. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
heard people do it, but it's not recommended. It's way too fibrous and too hard to eat. And there are no nutrition. It's just too much fiber at once.
yeah,
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
So then, Michelle, are you ready?
Now I'm ready. Now that I unmuted myself, I'm so ready.
Awesome. And then I think you're going to need this.
Yes, I am.
You,
I'm ready.
okay. So then,
Okay.
here you go.
I got it. You give the girl with the short arms. I have to reach all the way to Texas to get this. But thank you, Catherine. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to talk to you about our next cooking method, which is simmering. So now that we're halfway through the program this evening, I just want to do a little bit of a recap just to refresh everyone's memory about the cooking methods. So Erin did the sauteing, which is a quick high heat. Catherine did gentle, no added fat steaming. And now I'm going to be doing simmering, which is a gentle cooking in a liquid. Okay, so it's not dry heat, it's with cooking with a liquid, and it's going to slowly but surely develop that flavor, or as we call it, flavor development. So I'm going to be making creamy skillet white beans with wilted greens. This dish is so flavorful. For such a simple side dish, it can complement any meal. So let's go ahead and get started. I have my skillet here. So typically when you simmer, you're going to use a skillet depending on the size of your meal. This skillet is 12 inches. You could probably get away with 10 inches. This recipe calls for 2 cans. So the larger the skillet, the better. Make sure that there's a lip because when you're using beans and liquid, you don't want it to overflow. So make sure you do have enough room. I'm just going to be doing 1 can at a time, but if I was doing 2 cans, I probably would be using my really thick skillet with a really high lip. But for just 1 can, I'm going to use this. So I have this on medium-high heat, and just going to add a little bit of oil. Let that warm up a bit. And the first thing I'm going to do is slice my shallot. So if you're not familiar with a shallot, it actually resembles an onion. It is in the allium family. Some people will say it's a cross between garlic and an onion. It is not. It is not a hybrid. The flavor might resemble onion slash garlic, but it is in the allium family. It's not as pungent as an onion. So for dishes like this, it works well in. However, if you do not have access to a shallot, and this is my little sous chef, because the knife hits the cutting board, she comes running. This is Bella. So I'm slicing my shallot, but if you don't have access to a shallot, you can use an onion as well. That's fine, any type of onion. I'm just going to slice it. You can mince it, chop it, however you would like. I like the way it looks when it's sliced in the pan. So I just sliced it long ways, and I'm going to maybe just give it one more. I lied, 2 more. There we go. I'm going to add them right to my pan. I'm using olive oil, but you can use any type of cooking oil. Avocado oil would be great with this. Just a little bit, and we're just going to get this going. We're just going to saute this a little bit. Not simmering yet. I'm doing Erin's technique right now, just sauteing to bring out the flavor. So we don't want to burn, you just want to saute that for a little bit. So while that's simmering, the next thing that I'm going to do is get my garlic ready. I'm going to be adding some fresh garlic. I will be using my microplane. Same thing with the garlic. If you want to chop it, if you want to mince it, we have our Back to Basics video library. It shows you how to mince garlic. You can check that out. But I like to use this. It's just so simple and quick. I use this for ginger. I use it for citrus. And I just go all the way down. I'm very careful as I get to the end so I do not shred my fingertips. But I'm not going to lie, that may have happened before. I've had to start over. All right, so I'm just going to leave it like that till I'm ready to toss it in the pan. Let me give this a little quick mix. Next up, I'm going to be using rosemary. So rosemary, this is on the stem. Just pull the leaves off of it. Rosemary is one of our hardier herbs. So if you are going to use it, make sure it's like chicken, potatoes, If you were to put it like on a light piece of fish, it might be overpowering because it is a stronger herb. It's perfect for this dish because it just brings out the flavor of the coconut milk and the beans that we're going to be using soon. So I peeled it off the stem, just going to give it a rough chop. I don't have to mince it perfectly. And because it's one of the hardier herbs, it can go in while it's simmering. On the flip side, it would be if you had like parsley or cilantro are more tender herbs. That's something you might want to add towards the end of cooking because if you put it in the middle and it's simmering, you kind of lose all that flavor of that fresh herb when you take a bite into it. So those softer herbs add towards the end. The hardier herbs like this, marjoram, thyme, you can add during the cooking process. They can handle it. All right, so let me add this to the skillet as well. And if you're ever going to start an herb garden, if you don't have one yet, definitely do rosemary. It is so easy. It is not fickle. It can stand up the test of time, last for so long. All right, so again, we have our shallots in here. I added my garlic and my rosemary. All right, so next step, I am going to add the beans. So I'm using cannellini beans, which is a white bean. And you can use any type of bean that you would like. I like white beans because, or you could use a navy bean as well. They are creamier. They do break down a little bit, which is okay. If you were to use like a chickpea or a garbanzo bean, that takes a lot to really break down, which in some instances, it's okay. Like when you're roasting, that's why we roast chickpeas because they don't break down. But if you're using it on a skillet and you're cooking, you do want it to break down a little bit for that creaminess. So I used a can of cannellini beans. I rinsed them off, dumped them right in here, and I'm going to mix this in. So now let's go back to talking a little bit more about simmering. So simmering is like building on your flavors. So also too, I want to add a little bit of red pepper. You can omit this step if you want. The red pepper is going to give you just a little bit of a kick. You do not need that much. You can leave it out altogether. I'm going to add some salt also. So with simmering, you're building on the flavor. So we've done a few different steps here, and we still have 2 more steps to go. All right, so again, it's more of like a low and slow process. So when we're simmering, we are going to see bubbles, but we're not boiling it, okay? We're going to bring it to a boil, but then take it down and watch it simmer, just occasional bubbles. Ingredients like the ingredients like I added, the garlic, the herbs, and the broth that I'm going to be adding just kind of simmers and infuses into the beans, which is exactly what we want. All right. Let me kick this up just a little bit. And it smells delicious. Gosh, I love rosemary so much. So again, if you want to change out the beans, I would not go with anything too tough like a chickpea. Stick to the white beans since they are a little bit creamier. Kidney beans have a pretty tough skin also. Black beans or pinto beans, actually, you could probably get away with doing pinto beans. Those are a little bit softer. All right. So next step, I'm going to add in some vegetable broth. So I'll pour that right in. And next step, I'm using full fat coconut milk. So let's talk a little bit about coconut milk, why we are using the coconut milk. Okay, now everything's added. I'm going to kick this up just a notch. And you can see on the camera that it's starting to boil over here. But again, we don't want this to sit here and boil. We want it to simmer. So now it's starting to boil in other parts of the pan. I'm now going to turn it down. And you can see just a few bubbles, and that's where we want it. Okay, so while that's simmering, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about it and wrap it up so we can move on over to Aubrey. But full fat coconut. Don't worry about the fat. Yes, there is saturated fat in coconut milk, but we're not using a lot of it. You can use no fat, low fat coconut milk, but it's not going to be as creamy as you would like. Trust me, you need to use full fat. This actually tastes like I've used heavy cream. It is that good. So we're just using a little bit. You're not eating the whole dish in one sitting. I probably could, but we're not going to do that. So it's not like you're eating all of that coconut milk all at one time. So do not miss out. Use the full fat coconut milk. Okay. So for the sake of time, so typically this would sit and simmer for 10 minutes. We don't have 10 minutes. So through the magic of television, I'm going to switch out. And before class, let me turn this heat off. Before class, I did let this simmer. And as you can see that the liquid has pretty much evaporated. The broth, the coconut milk, and you can see the creaminess here when I push the beans aside. And if you find that it's a little bit too thick, maybe you want it a little bit soupier, that's okay. You can add a little bit of coconut milk. You're going to have extra. You can add a little bit of broth. You can add a little bit of water to thin it out. If you feel that you want it to be creamier, then maybe cook it a little bit longer than 10 minutes, okay? So this is what it looks like. Last but not least, we are going to add our spinach. So I'm just using fresh spinach. You can use whatever green you would like. You can use kale, collard greens, whatever you have on hand, right? I also have some frozen spinach. You can use frozen spinach as well. If you do use frozen spinach, what I would do is defrost it and then squeeze it to get all of the moisture out, unless you do need to add a little bit of moisture to your beans. But for the most part, squeeze it out because your beans should be perfect just by following the recipe. So if you are going to do frozen, defrost it, squeeze the water out, and then add it. All right, so ideally, this is it. You just keep mixing until the spinach wilts down, and you can get it as wilty as you would like. All right, so let me plate this. Okay, here we go. Our creamy skillet white beans with wilted greens. I am going to pair this with a piece of haddock for dinner and maybe another little side salad. But it smells so good. It is creamy deliciousness. For such a simple, quick side dish, it really has a lot of flavor. And that is it. I think we're doing another method, right, Aubrey? Are you ready? I think we're going to be doing some more dry heat cooking.
Sure am, but I do need that spoon if you can pass it to me.
Yes. Luckily, Aubrey does not live far from me, so it will not be as a stretch as Texas. So,
Yeah.
ready? Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready. Okay, I think I got it.
Okay,
I got it.
good.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
Yes.
And I am very excited to present our last cooking method today, which is roasting. So everybody largely was using the stove top here today. I am going to be using the actual stove itself. And before we even jump in, I just want to highlight something Michelle mentioned right at the end, how I'm moving towards dry heat. And I know we kind of talked about this before, but I always found that it could be a little bit confusing. Dry heat cooking versus moist heat cooking. And so when we think about today, right, we have our sauteing. That is considered a dry heat cooking method because although it's not dry, it doesn't incorporate water as the liquid. Moist heat means water. So we're thinking about this steaming and even the simmering, right? We've got that liquid in there. Those are going to be more moist heat. Whereas something like sauteing, even though you're using oil in the pan, and roasting, where we will still be using oil, they're considered dry heat cooking methods. Now, there's truly dry heat, right? Like air frying, if you're not necessarily putting any oil on it. But the key here, I think, is to say that there's not really a benefit one way or another. Sometimes with more moist heat cooking methods, for example, boiling, where you're cooking something in a pot of water, we do see a little bit of a loss of water soluble nutrients. However, it's typically not significant. So I would say if you are somebody who is trying to, let's say, maybe eat more vegetables, explore different methods of cooking. And that's what these Cooking Methods 101 virtual hangouts are for, right? To give you more recipes and more ideas and just explain these concepts a bit more. So I will be doing roasting. My oven is at 425. Now, roasting, the key is to have your heat high enough. You don't want it too high and you're broiling it and all of a sudden it's burnt. But typically for roasting, we keep the oven between 400 and 425. That gives us good caramelization. Now, the key, kind of like Erin mentioned, we don't want any moisture in there per se from the form of water. So for my vegetables, we're actually going to have to take a little bit of the moisture out, and I'll explain why. So I have a bowl here over here. It would take quite some time for me to cut up these root vegetables on camera. As we all know, they're very firm. They take a little bit of grit when you're chopping them up. So what I did to expedite my time here for our roasted root vegetables is I actually pre-cut my vegetables earlier. Now they're in this big bowl. It's hard to see. I'm not going to tilt it too much because the bowl currently is also full of water. You might be wondering, why is the bowl full of water? Well, that's because things like our potatoes, our sweet potatoes, they can sometimes oxidize a bit when they're stored and air is accessing them. You may have noticed this before if you've chopped up a potato and like left a piece on the cutting board, gets almost like a brownish tinge to it. They can even see it in some of the vegetables that were a little closer to the top of this bowl while it was sitting in the fridge. Putting them in water helps to prevent that reaction. So instead, they're going to stay fresh, they're going to stay crisp as well too, and then we're going to prevent that browning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my big bowl of veggies here. I have over the sink a colander. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to drain my veggies. Now, the recipe calls for 4 pounds of root vegetables. And I very specifically did not say what root vegetables because I think it's all about what you have on hand. I had some carrots left over from my meal prep for the week, so I used those. I had a potato, so I used that. And then I got some sweet potato and I got some parsnips. So I've got 4 different root veggies in here. You could also use something like winter squash if you wanted to. It's really very flexible. So I drain these out. I'm just taking a paper towel. I just don't want them to be soaking wet, right? I'm not going to get probably all of the moisture and liquid off of this, but I don't want them to be soaked. So I'm just dabbing the top here. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take these and pour them out on my sheeting. And because with that, I got a little bit of moisture in there too. I'm going to take a second and I'm just going to use this paper towel. You could also use just a regular kitchen towel to get a little bit of that moisture off. Now, when it comes to roasting, and I will say, I've probably said this 100 times, so I'm so sorry if you've heard me say it before. It is ultimately important for your food to ideally be cut at a similar size. So you can see here, some are a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller than others, right? We have our parsnips, and those are in the shape of a circle, but then we have maybe our sweet potatoes, which are in the shape of a rectangle. But generally speaking, these are all a similar size. That is because of the way these cook in terms of roasting. When we have variation in size, then we start to see issues where some things are browning, some things aren't cooked yet. So we want everything to be fairly similar. The caveat to this is if you're cooking different types of foods that maybe would have very different cooking times. For example, you saw for a couple folks today do spinach that cooked so quickly, right? If you, for some reason, were making a sheet pan and you had spinach and you had potatoes, those are going to take two very different amounts of time to cook. So the sizes could be different. I would ultimately almost recommend them being cooked on different sheets for different amounts of time. So root vegetables all kind of fall in the same cooking starchy category where they're all going to take a similar amount of time. Like Michelle mentioned with our Back to Basics video library, we do actually have a video on roasting vegetables in which I do talk a little bit about how long you would maybe want to roast root veggies versus cruciferous veggies versus this versus that. So definitely take a look at that if you are not familiar. Now, I'm going to pop this off to the side just for right now. Only addition we're going to make to this veggie-wise is I'm going to put some red onion in it. And so I have half of a red onion. I'm doing half of the recipe. You'll see why in a second. But I am going to take it and I am going to slice to get thin strips of red onion. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I like to try to keep them fairly uniform as I'm cutting them. And then I didn't cut through the top, so I'll chop the top off right there. All right, and what I'm gonna do is I like to take the red onion, I like to try my best to really spread it out. I don't want there to be big chunks of red onion and then small little bits of red onion. So I like to kind of take my time, pull all the pieces of the slices apart. Beautiful. And then for this, we're really just going to season it up and put it in the oven. Now, a number of, I want to say almost years ago, maybe not months ago before I say that, Catherine wrote a great article for our blog with some seasonings for roasted vegetables. Highly recommend that you take a look at that. This is just one option. You can see me, I'm pulling this apart right now just because that onion was a little bit big. But you can check that out if you're wondering, well, what kind of seasonings and flavors should I put on it? For today, what we are going to do is simply some garlic powder, and then we're going to do some dried rosemary and some salt and some pepper. Now, I'm using garlic powder specifically for this because this is going to be in the oven for 25 to 35 minutes. If I was using fresh garlic, especially thinking about how we chop garlic down so small and fine, there is a good chance it would be burnt ultimately by the time that I actually ended up taking this out of the oven. So I'm going to use garlic powder to still get that delicious garlicky flavor, but without the browning and the burning. So I've got some olive oil here. You could also use avocado oil. I'm going to pop on my seasonings, and then I am the queen of just really getting in there. So I'm going to mix everything with my hands because I find that that is the easiest way to make sure everything's coated. I have about a half of a teaspoon of garlic powder, half of a teaspoon of rosemary, and then just eyeballed some salt and some pepper in there to my liking. You could omit the salt if you're thinking about your blood pressure. But also, again, like I was saying, I know I saw Erin post that link in there. Make sure you check out that blog. And if you're thinking these seasonings maybe are not your style, try out a different blend of seasonings, right? Maybe you make a Mediterranean blend, or I know some stores and a lot of stores honestly sell seasoning blends now, so you don't even have to do the thinking. Or if you're thinking, I have 100 different seasonings in my cabinet, how can I use them? Definitely check that out for some ideas. All right, now I'm spreading everything out. I want to make sure that nothing is overcrowded. I want to make sure things are not all on top of each other because then they are not going to cook evenly. All right, beautiful. Before I do anything, I'm gonna wash off my hands. And then, like I said, my oven is at 425. We're going to put this in for about 25 to 35 minutes. I say about because I think it's important to be flexible, right? If you cut your pieces much bigger than this, it will probably take longer. Or if you cut them smaller, it will take less time. So I usually will start with the low end, putting it in for 25 minutes, and then I'll kind of take a look at it after 25. What does it look like? Does it need more time? You can't go back on time. So always checking early, I think is a good idea. So I'm going to pop this into the oven, but it is 5:56. So through the magic of TV, I also have some root vegetables that have already been roasted. I have the sheet pan over here, but this looks much nicer. So this is what they look like once they're roasted. You can see they actually kind of fade in color a bit, particularly like the oranges as well. The whites become more translucent. Now we're going to make a really delicious lemon tahini drizzle to go on top. So I have in here, this is about a quarter cup of tahini in here. I just popped it right in my bowl to make my life a little easier. I need 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. So I find often when I'm cutting a lemon for juice that one whole lemon is about 2 tablespoons. And again, I'm all about flexibility. So I'm going to use this whole lemon because I do really love lemon. So even if it's a little bit extra, that's okay. All right. I did get a seed in there. It happens to the best of us, you know? All
I
right.
was going to say, I'm so
I
impressed that you didn't get any seeds in there as I'm
I
watching. Like, what's
did.
your trick?
I did. One trick is, though, to squeeze it upright. So, of course, your hands will get all messy. However, then if a seed pops out, it's kind of upwards in your hand versus if you go this way, it's more than likely to fall into the bowl. So, that's kind of my tip there. I clearly didn't do it, but it is a tip that you could use. All right. I am going to put in about a teaspoon of minced garlic. Now, I actually think I saw something in the chat earlier. Somebody was asking about garlic. Is there any issue with garlic that's been like pre-minced or in the jar or what have you? The answer is no. And I think it is a really great way to incorporate garlic and ginger as well. We see it in the store that way too without having to have the hassle of chopping. It is, of course, a different flavor. However, I do still think it is deliciously fresh. You could also use garlic powder if you don't have either of those on hand. So I'm doing about a teaspoon there. And then last but not least, I'm going to put in some salt. Now I'm going to give this a little bit of a mix. I want this to be pretty thin. I want it to be a drizzling kind of consistency. So if you're mixing this, I think it's very dependent on your tahini. Mine is pretty thin to begin with, but some of them are pretty thick, like peanut butter. And so with that, you may need to add a little bit of warm water as the recipe calls for. I'm going to put a little bit. It's not super thick, but I just want to make sure that it is nice and thinned out. Just a drizzle. Again, same thing with the cooking. You can't take back time. You can't take back the water that you add into this drizzle. So now that it's a nice, smooth consistency, I'm going to take it. I'm going to drizzle it. Beautiful. All right. And I have my roasted root vegetables with a lemon tahini drizzle. And that, my friends, is our last cooking method. I hope that everybody learned a lot about different types of cooking methods and maybe some new things that you maybe weren't familiar with previously.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Well, any questions before we wrap up? Just a lot of thanks. Hopefully, we learned a lot. I will pop also the link to our Back to Basics. I know we brought the Back to Basics video library up a couple times tonight. It's a great way to learn basic cooking techniques and some of these culinary skills give you to give you some encouragement to get into the kitchen, work through recipes. So I'll pop that link in the chat. So this was great. Wonderful. Just a lot of thanks. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thanks for your questions and inquiries. Remember, all of these recipes are on our blog. So if you go to uniteforher.org/blog, you'll see them right at the top. They were just posted recently. We hope to see you at our events, although we are wrapping up National Nutrition Month with our virtual hangout tonight. We've got so much to look forward to. And our next education segment we have coming to you is our speaker series happening on April 16th at 6 p.m. April is National Financial Literacy Month, so we are hosting a financial resources panel with our partners, Triage Cancer and Family Reach. So definitely join us for that, as well as much more happening later in April. And of course, I want to give a big thanks to our education sponsors for continuing to support all of our education initiatives, including our virtual hangout tonight. So our segment this evening is presented through UFH Connect by our sponsors, West, Merck, Novartis, and Gilead Sciences. We're so appreciative of our gold sponsors, Pfizer, GSK, and Daiichi Sankyo. And we have additional support from Tercera Therapeutics and Veristem Oncology. And of course, for National Nutrition Month, our culinary nutrition content that took place throughout the entire month of March is sponsored by Merck. So we are so grateful for their ongoing support. So thank you so much for hanging out with us this evening in our kitchens. Please, as always, try these recipes on your own. Let us know what you think. Perhaps this is inspiring you to try these different cooking methods. And as always, we hope to see you again for our education segments, but also our cooking classes. So thanks so much for joining us, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your night and the rest of the week ahead.